Episode 1, amazing. Episode 2, amazing. Episode 3, just as amazing. In this episode, we delve in from a hashkafa perspective, just how much work you need to put into your work versus having emunah and bitachon that Hashem will provide for you. We took a visit to the OU's headquarters. The audio might sound a little bit different here, but we were in their Lower Manhattan headquarters, met with Reb Moshe Hauer. Super insightful. I think you'll like episode 3. Sponsored by livingsmarterjewish.org. All your money resources that you need are on that website. If you want to speak to someone, hit them up, info@livingsmarterjewish.org. Enjoy. Being a Jew, awesome. Managing personal finances, not so awesome. Welcome to Kosher Money. Welcome to another episode of Kosher Money. Today we have with us Reb Moshe Hauer, Executive Vice President at the OU. And for those that are unfamiliar with the OU, I encourage them to push pause, do a quick Google search, but I do believe many are familiar. Rabbi Hauer, how are you?
Baruch Hashem. Thank God, very good, very well.
I think this is an important conversation to have as we work our way into other episodes about budgeting, savings, earnings. Wanted to hit this right off the bat. When it comes to hishtadlus versus bitachon and emunah, how does a frum Jew balance those two, right? We don't go through school with some sort of equation that says, okay, 60% of your life should be focused on emunah and bitachon, and then you allocate 40% to hishtadlus. And just to piggyback off that, should I be staying at work until 10 o'clock, right, if I'm running a business? Or no, I leave at 6 o'clock, allocate the rest of the night with my family? Where do you draw the line on something like that?
Okay. The question is a critical question, and there's not a simple single answer to the question of the balance between hishtadlus and bitachon. There's something of a sliding scale that exists in this matter, and let's try to talk it through and think about it a little bit. Perhaps, though, to draw sort of a straw man to start with, we have a lot of debates about this in the frum community when it comes to parnasa. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about another area, medicine. The same questions of hishtadlus versus bitachon apply when it comes to a medical issue, a medical emergency. In fact, one of the primary makoros that we have in the Rishonim that guide us in managing this is a famous Ramban in Parshas Bechukosai, which is mostly focused on the matter of medicine. Now, what's our attitude as a community when it comes to hishtadlus for medicine? There are few communities in the world, I think, that are as sophisticated in their pursuit of making proper efforts, sophisticated efforts when it comes to medical treatment. Is there any other community that you know of that has its own emergency medical services to make sure that the response comes as quickly as possible? Bitachon has not put Hatzalah out of business. Right. There's no community in the world that has the kind of medical referral to get the greatest experts, that a frum person who has an ingrown toenail has it treated by the chief of surgery at Columbia Presbyterian. We go all out when it comes to those things. And so the difference maybe between them is sometimes it's easier to approach emergencies than it is to approach basic constant lifestyle issues. So let's just put that out there as we consider this discussion, because we all understand that the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the world is that He expects us to make efforts on every realm, even in areas, Chazal taught us that even in areas where His intervention is assured, like, for example, the symbol of Parnasa in Klal Yisrael was the Shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash. There's your bread, there's your food. And everybody knows, there was a miracle which happened with the Lechem Hapanim, that it stayed warm from when it was baked on Erev Shabbos till it was removed from the Shulchan, the 9th day from then, which is the following Shabbos. Lechem Cham Yom Hilakcho. And yet, as we know, Chazal told us, we'll set it up, put certain pipes on the table so that the breads aren't sitting on top of each other so that they'll stay fresh. Even when a miracle will occur, You're supposed to make efforts. That's part of the human partnership that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects, that we do our part. And bitachon means that you believe that you're supposed to make efforts, but the success of those efforts are determined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person could work very hard, and Hashem could decide that it's not someone to it can be delivered. Ton nicht eifton. It's a famous expression. Our job is to do, not to accomplish. We do, and we hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings us the accomplishment. So the discussion of Hishtadlus and Bitachon, again, I don't mean to oversimplify. We'll go deeper a little bit, but Hishtadlus is an area which is our responsibility. And whenever we are going to face a decision, when it comes to the Parnasa questions, which we're here to talk about, and say, but one second, what about Hishtadlus? We would do wise to ask ourselves, if this was a medical question, would we have the same, quote-unquote, laissez-faire attitude and say, I'm going to put my trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or would I feel that this is still part of the effort which is mandated for me by HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So you understand what I'm saying? It's sort of like, I think it's helpful to draw that context.
On the medical side, though, people will go to all ends of the earth to seek out a solution, right? That's life or death.
Right.
Parnasa, on the other hand, is somewhat lower down on the totem pole when it comes to urgency. Should someone go to all ends of the earth, right?
So there's a significant difference that you point out. It's constant. It's the daily routine of the person. Chazal taught us that you should be discriminating when you choose what you do for a parnasa. I think there are two primary places where Chazal address it. One is in the Mishnah at the end of Maseches Kiddushin, where it says that a person should teach their child an umnus kala v'nekiya. Two criteria: kala, light, and nekiya, clean. Kala means that it doesn't overwhelm their life, which is a very, very relevant instruction. There are jobs that are 724 or 624, we would say in our world, and they can overtake one's life. It might be easier to have a kind of a parnasa which is not so intense. And Nikia is clean.
I like how the phone went off. Do you have a job that's kal? I guess that's a sign to...
No, but I don't know how to turn off the volume on my ringer.
I can help with that.
It was off. You please
sure,
do it. It was off forever, and suddenly today it started making noise.
That's okay. There you go.
Okay.
So seeking out those jobs that are kal.
So there's a value to kala, to be able to have a career that allows you to, quote unquote, also have a life separate from that. The picture that the Rambam drew of a person's day, where it's divided into thirds of sleep, taking care of all one's personal needs, including work and learning. And it's like 8 hours each. It's like dreamy on every level. It's just completely away, different from our lifestyle and from what, that's what we call a klal yugabat. That's not working. But there still is a value to that sort of balanced perspective. It's a balance of hishtadlus and bitachon. It's also a balance of work and life, work and avodas Hashem, work and family. That is important to strike. And on the second level is Nakiya. And Nakiya is very important. Nakiya means clean. Remember, the context where the Mishnah teaches that is a person who would have an umnus, who would have a craft, a trade, that would bring them perhaps into morally compromising situations or temptation. That's where we learn Hilchas Yichud, right. About how a person, would be interacting with the opposite gender. So a craft which doesn't call upon the person to make moral compromises, and or ethical compromises. And that's probably one of the biggest pieces when it comes to the Hishtadlus Bitachon matter, because we make efforts. if we believe that the efforts themselves yield fruit, so we might disregard whether there are side problems with the efforts, like they're not exactly ethical, they're a little gray or something like that. But if we understand that the efforts themselves are just the setup for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help us, it's not really possible to imagine that Hashem wants us to do this.
Right.
Hashem wants us to do this. So the bitachon standard is very central to our thinking, but perhaps we would say less so to how much I'm going to do and more to what specifically I'm going to do and what I'm going to consider to be off limits.
Understood. So let's say someone does have the right job in the right industry, and assuming that there are no moral compromises and it is kal, it is light, how, and thinking of the Rambam in terms of allocating, and maybe it is dreamy to think that you can do 8, 8, and 8, is that something that, even if someone can't get it to be a perfect equation, is that something that someone should be striving for, right? Keeping in mind that, hey, my job does require me at certain points to spend 12 hours in the office. Should I actively fight back against that? Not so much to lose their job, but to say, hey, I need to keep to somewhat of a quote unquote normal schedule, because at some point, the more I put in, I'm not going to see a different return.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. A person needs to try to do, but we have to be realistic, quote unquote, in this conversation, knowing what the field is. So what does that mean? Say you have to make sure that you don't work too hard, that it doesn't take over your life. Okay, that's good. And how am I going to pay my mortgage? And how am I going to pay my tuitions? And how am I going to do everything? We know that we have to put in. The way you frame the question, and it's not necessarily typical, but just to bring it back, there's a famous Gemara where I think it was Rava, if I'm not mistaken, told his Talmidim, I don't want to see you during Nisan and Tishrei, because those were high agricultural seasons. Spend day and night working your fields, and that way the rest of the year I'll be able to see you. In other words, yeah, there's certain times when you say, okay, go all out, put everything you can into work, and that way the balance, it won't be each and every day has balance, but your life will have balance. You can invest a lot of time now, and then you'll be able to have, you'll have a lot of time. You'll have a lot of time later. I don't know that every one of us has the ability to be able to arrange their life and their career that way and still make a go of it.
Assuming we're not farmers, in the case
Assuming
of
we're not farmers, right?
Yeah.
Assuming we're not farmers. And also, in many, if a person is in certain kinds of trades, they have high season, toy season or jewelry season or tax season or whatever else it is, and maybe they can do a ton of work then and perhaps be able to take it easy at other times, and that's a way to find balance. But the goal has to be there with both a practical realization of what can be accomplished and can't be accomplished, and just don't shelve the goal. We need to understand that we have to be human beings outside of work. Hopefully, our work could blend with our life goals and not just be a complete and total distraction from them, but we have to be there for family. We have to be able to be Jews, who are also in the Torah, who learn and are able to daven. It's quite a menu of responsibilities that we have, and we have a very expensive lifestyle. So it makes the first, the work part a big deal, but that's part of what has to frame this, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Sure. Yeah, I think, and we'll get to the very expensive lifestyle in this particular episode, though I do want to touch on one more point. When it comes to building bitachon or becoming a bal bitachon, what are practical tips on how one can attain that, right? How do you How do you bring more bitachon into your life, particularly when it comes to finances, right? For people that may be struggling, how do you say, hey, maybe I won't spend 12 more hours in the office, but I'm going to increase the amount of bitachon that I have? How does one acquire this magical bitachon?
Okay. Is there a magical way to acquire bitachon? I don't know if there's such a thing called magical bitachon. Is there a magical way to accomplish bitachon? I don't think so. I think that bitachon is acquired through diligence at, in the language of Chazal, Shem Shamayim Shogor Befiv. Have Hashem's name on your lips, which can be very, very superficial, but it could also be real. If we stop when we're looking for something, that we lost, and we don't just say, I got to look in this other place, but we stop and we say, Hashem, illuminate my eyes, whatever you want to, whatever you want to say. When we don't engage in hishtadlus without invoking Hashem's name. The reason why we daven shachris in the morning before we go to part of it is that we frame every effort which we're about to make in terms of the tefillah. We're not going to go it alone and just go out into the workplace. We daven. Now, again, for us, sometimes we bifurcate, okay, there's davening, and then I'm going to work. Davening is supposed to be the hagdama to work. Mincha is not, I'm not taking a break during the day, daven, and then go back. It's supposed to carry the rest of what we're doing. And the more in our minds we see those things as together, the more that becomes a reality that will influence our decisions. And Chazal teach us, the more Hashem will be a presence. Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach BaHashem, V'haya Hashem Yiftacho. The more we genuinely, through and through, in our bones, are trusting in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's the guy I'm looking out for. That's the one he's looking to me. I want to be there for him. The one who gives me a distracted glance once in a while, so I'll give him a distracted glance once in a while. And, as sobering as that is, but that's what the Chayvas Halvavas wrote in the Shara Bitachon, it's just going to get less attention.
Right.
So that's part of what we were alluding to earlier when we spoke about the sliding scale. Well, the more we make God a part of our lives, the more he is.
It sounds like the theme so far of this particular episode and this discussion is living with intent. As Jews, everything we do should be with intent. So for the listening audience that might be going through the motions of building up their career and looking to earn more and work on their hishtadlus, it's not going to happen by chance, right? This is something that someone has to actively take upon themselves to build that bitachon.
To build that muscle at the same time.
Right.
To build that muscle, that person has to have a vision for their hishtadlus. They also have to have a vision for their bitachon. To be spiritually aspirational and ambitious, side by side with all the other ambition that we bring to our tasks in life, is a game changer. It's a real game changer.
When it comes to the standards of living in the Jewish world, right? You can drive through other neighborhoods. There's certainly affluent neighborhoods in the non-Jewish world, and then there are less affluent neighborhoods. There's a melting pot when it comes to Orthodox Jewry, right? We have limited amounts of neighborhoods, right? No, you're not going to get a phone call from a friend and say, hey, I moved over to Kansas. There's nothing there, right? In terms when it comes to kosher food, or limited options, I should say.
Baruch Hashem, we have a nice Orthodox Jewish community in Kansas.
Okay, I'm coming up. I'm in the OU telling them what they do have or don't have. But yeah.
Beautiful community, I'm sure.
Yeah?
Yes.
It's growing?
Yes, I think so.
You could probably provide a list of neighborhoods that people should.
We have a whole small communities project of small communities in Klal Yisrael that are growing and developing seriously.
Wow.
And that offer, amongst other things, they offer a partial solution to the Orthodox affordability issue.
Should that be a serious consideration for people that feel that they can't make it in a particular neighborhood to consider, hey, let me move to an out of town neighborhood?
I think it should be a serious consideration even for people who feel that they can make it. It's not, out of town isn't for quote unquote losers who can't make it.
Yeah.
Out of town is an opportunity for many people to, number one, because that's what we're talking about, but I don't necessarily feel that this is objectively number one, is to escape many of the pressures. Right? A person could make it even if their monthly nut is $50,000 between tuition and their house payment and their car payments and so on and so forth. They can make it, but they're going to be that guy or that couple that we talked about before who doesn't have a life, who's working day and night. And maybe if they're in Kansas City or they're in Detroit or Cincinnati or some other place, maybe they can work significantly less and have more of a life. So it's not that they can't make it in the big city, but they want a different quality of life that they can sometimes have when they're away from some of the serious pressures which our larger Jewish communities have. In addition, they can have the meaningful impact of being in a smaller community where their presence is more noticed and more valued, and the contributions they can make are going to be much bigger. It's a very valuable option for many people. Now, again, many wouldn't consider it because they value something else, which is valuable, which is to have their kids grow up down the block or around the corner from their grandparents or from uncles and aunts and so on and so forth. There are many considerations in this decision, like many others.
There's also this stigma.
There is something there in Kansas.
Yeah, but there is
Besides Dorothy.
Yeah, there is this stigma though that, oh, you're from out of town, or right there it comes along with.
It depends amongst whom.
Yeah.
In certain places, there's quote unquote a stigma about being from out of town, and in certain places, there's a stigma about being from in town.
In town, right? So, what are the growing neighborhoods? What cities out there? Assuming that I'm an ignorant New Yorker, right?
Well, I haven't been to Kansas recently.
Okay.
But I could just give you two examples that I had the privilege happened to visit just a few weeks ago, back to back, Cincinnati and Detroit, which are two. Cincinnati's smaller, Detroit is larger. In both communities, it's right now hard to find a house in the Frum community because so many people are living there, want to live there, and they're beautifully developing communities with a growing Jewish infrastructure, schooling, and everything, and a different pace.
10 to 20 years ago, that these communities weren't as built up as where they are now.
No.
Wow.
10 years ago, 6 years ago. These communities have many, dozens of families moving there every summer.
And that's a byproduct of children, a second generation that's moving in, or people from
there are some intentional efforts which are done to grow these communities, and some have built around Kolalim and around job opportunities and real estate opportunities, and but it's happening. There's a hunger many people have to find alternatives to the big cities and all that brings.
And the OU, that's one of the focuses, enhancing Jewish life.
We have a specific project which is for helping to develop communities. Simon, what's the formal name of it? The fair?
Small communities fair.
The small communities.
It's amazing how the OU has so many different divisions, projects, and efforts that the name of a particular, right? In my small business, I have like 3 total projects, right?
Yeah.
Here, there's so many different subsets.
Baruch Hashem, there are many, many things that we need to be engaged in, and this is a very valuable one. Those quote-unquote small communities, maybe we should call them the growing communities, because they are, and the Jewish people need options, beyond the tri-state. And again, there is such opportunity And there's something very, very strong and wholesome that's growing in these communities.
Nowhere in the Luchos does it talk about how much materialism one should have, right? Assuming someone gives tzedakah and plentiful amounts. Is overindulgence addressed by Chazal and the Mefarshim on how much is too much, right? You look at weddings. They have pre-chuppah, massive smorgasbords in exotic locations. How much is too much, right? Did I stump? But no.
Baruch Hashem, you ask, Eli asks good questions, and you ask questions that don't have a single, simple answer.
I was looking for a specific number, right?
Like specific number,
yeah,
okay.
274,000
Perfect.
Too much?
Perfect,
yeah.
That's it. Chazal speak in different places about this. The Ramban, for example, is a famous comment of the Ramban, who speaks about Naval Bishras HaTorah, who feels that it's a mitzvah deoraisa, Torah command, a mitzvah saseh, for a person to make sure that they do not become completely enmeshed, overwhelmed in material things, that they should be kedoshim, which means that they should be somewhat above that, above those material things. Ramban famously describes the person who makes sure to have glat kosher, chol v'Yisrael, yashan, chasidish shechita and the works, but just eats all day and the like. And the Ramban says that's a person who's a failed human being, a novel, Bishras HaTorah, even though he's technically maybe walking between the lines. We're supposed to be kedoshim, and that's like the easiest way to sort of answer the question. Is what we are observing kedusha. Now, fascinatingly, there was a man who was known as the Kadosh. I'm not talking about a Hasidic Rebbe. I'm talking about Rav Yehuda Nasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbeinu HaKadosh was someone that throughout the year on his table were all kinds of plants, like paska, me'al shulchanai, like tznaim, like chazeres, like b'mais hachama, like b'mais hakshamim, which means that he had the pick of vegetables and plants and things the whole year round. Now for us, that's no big deal because they ship in the kiwis from New Zealand and
is that an exotic
wherever else it is. But
was that a sign of
abundance? It was a sign of abundance. To be able to have those things not just when it's in season, but to have it all the time was a sign of wealth. And it continues to be. It continues to be a sign of wealth, except just we have a much less of a baseline. It's a sign of a prosperous society. But he had it all, and he famously expressed it in the extreme. That when he died, he held up his pinky and he said, "I didn't benefit from this or enjoy this afilu ke'etzbah, even like a pinky finger size, whatever that means."
So it's up for debate whether Rabbi Yehuda Nasi lived in an out-of-town community.
No, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi lived in town.
In town.
He was the Nasi. He had a gorgeous house. He had a laden table. And he wasn't imprisoned by it. He wasn't imprisoned by it. He was ready to drop it in a second. And that's really what, to be a kadosh means to be above. To be above. A person is blessed with material success. There's nowhere that I know of that it would say that they have a mitzvah to pretend that they're making the same amount of money as a minimum wage worker. I mean, they can live like that, so why don't you live like that? No. For those who have been given blessing, they have every right to live with that blessing. But to be imprisoned by that blessing is where the problem is, so to speak. I don't think the right term is imprisoned by the blessing, but then to become a creature of that material success. That's where the problem is. And it manifests itself in the fact that it becomes so widespread a need for others to be able to managed the same way.
So how much onus is on a person in that position to not create peer pressure? Keeping up with the cones is a term that gets thrown around. Is there no onus on him, right? If he's living, assuming he's living where he's not imprisoned by the blessing, he's sharing the wealth, etc., but he is also creating some sort of peer pressure for the fellow down the block, is it the onus on the fellow down the block to not feel the need to live within the...
I think there's a word onus and there's a word opportunity. Right? We're using the English word onus, right?
Yeah.
The onus, which is the burden, the responsibility, I do not think is on the wealthy person. Nope. He's allowed to live within his means. The onus is on everybody to live within their means. He has more means. The onus is on him is to live within his means. The person who has lesser means has to look in the mirror, has to look in the bank account, and to see what they can afford and decide and live their lives accordingly. That's who the onus is upon. There is an opportunity for a person who has more to say, I could have, but I want to show that even though I could, I don't need to. I want to demonstrate it to myself. Maybe I want to make it easier for others. And that's an opportunity for that person to show leadership. I'm sure you, like I have seen people who could have made that $274,000 affair, could have had the, whatever it is, but decided, I'm going to make a simpler wedding, and maybe I'll use some of that money to help the young couple have a down payment. Maybe I'll use it to help someone who doesn't have the ability even to have a basic wedding, to help, orphans or whatever it is, to be able to have. Or maybe I'll just actually keep it in the bank, which isn't an avera either. It's not an avera. It doesn't have to burn a hole in anybody's, pocket or bank book. And when they do it, some people look and say, they made such a wedding. More people look and say, gvura. That person just did something. Now, that's not an onus. There's nothing wrong with a person doing what their means afford them to do. Everybody has that as their onus, that they have to do that. If somebody wants to go lifnei mishuras hadin, it's different. Now, there's a famous case, which is in the Gemara in Ksubas, which was a takana that remains in place to this day, which was that there was a time when it was fancy funerals. We don't know in the Orthodox community what that means, basically. But there was a time when it was fancy funerals were the thing. And the Gemara records that people were abandoning their dead because they couldn't make a funeral that would meet, that would keep up with the Koans, although the Koans didn't usually go to funerals. But they couldn't make a funeral that would keep up with the expected standards, so they abandoned their dead.
And that money's coming out of the well? Maybe that's why they pivoted away.
So they made a takana, and the takana was, Rebbe said, right? Don't. Rabbi Gamliel, was it? Excuse me, maybe I'm wrong. One of from the Mishpachas Hanasi,
right.
Excuse me for not remembering, said, bury me in the simplest. Don't bury me b'shiroim, bury me in the simplest. And that's why, to this day, we have a simple pine box. We have a simple linen shroud. Okay, sometimes the hearse is a Cadillac. But aside from that, those were the main takanas. Now they did that. They imposed it, and historically in Jewish history, there were times where they did that for other things as well, where they said you can't. But it's a very difficult thing to impose generally, and it's not necessarily. That's when it's desperate. Ideally, we should be a mature community that know how to live within our means. And that's really the thing that does it all. The Rambam writes about, you asked before about sources in Chazal. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Deos about a person, needing to live within their means, in certain areas even a little bit below their means, in one area a little bit above their means. You know, but by and large, you know, this is the way of Chachamim, as the Rambam wrote. You know, to do it that way, and it's not. You know, one thing which is a very important point for us to talk about is that living within one's means is not sapping out the life from the party. It's not true. The person who's going to live within their means, live a good balanced lifestyle, it's joyful, it's positive, and it's not like joyful or positive in the austere sense of that family that I visited in Mea Shearim that had 44 children, you know, in a 2-bedroom apartment, you know, living on bookshelves. I'm talking about just, you know, normal lifestyle.
That's out of town, by the way, right? The 2 bedrooms for him.
Where you just you know you can make it. You're handling yourself. You know, you don't have the fanciest thing, but you don't have the monthly payment that goes along with it.
I was expecting a different answer, to be honest, to the peer pressure question, right? I was expecting, yeah, there is some level of onus. I mean, assuming that there is someone down the block or a subset of houses on your block where you know they can't afford a certain car or to build up on their house, etc., that there is an answer there where, yeah, maybe you take it down a notch so that they feel more comfortable within their means. So just, I think that was eye-opening. And
yeah, no, I don't know of such a halachic responsibility that exists. And again, there are people who do it. It came up in a conversation, you know, just earlier today about an outstanding communal leader in a Jewish community, out-of-town Jewish community, who could live in a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful home, but chooses to live in a home which matches the members of his community,
right,
because he doesn't want to be responsible for creating that kind of a wave. Ashrei Chelko, he's not obligated to do that.
He's going above
the onus is on each and every one of us to live within our means.
Right.
And the rewards of that will be felt by each and every one of us who does so.
I like this idea that you phrased it as an opportunity more so than an onus. I wanted to touch on government benefits, right? I'm looking at a chart here from the Census Bureau, and we'll link to it in the podcast notes. When it discusses from neighborhoods, right? It has the percentage of the persons in poverty, what their median household income, at least this is what is reported. And you have poverty rates, numbers that are considerably higher than perhaps other neighborhoods in New York. The question here is, how much, or I should phrase it, what's the Torah Dika approach to government benefits? When someone's starting out as a couple, should they be taking government benefits, assuming that a grandfather or a father could potentially help them along their way? Is that the right approach? These numbers are considerably higher, like I said. Is this, and there are discussions about negativity being bred from non-Jews that may be looking at this and saying, hey, why don't they get a job, right? You have some people here in Kollel or that are learning and that are relying on it. Are we, as a community, not setting ourselves up for success when we look at numbers like this? And I know, and I have this tendency to pack 7 questions into one, so feel free to pick it.
An easy question, so that's the good
thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's a very layered question. There are a number of issues that this question impacts. So let's try to talk about it a little bit. Number one, many of the communities that you listed are growing, bli ayin hara, large families. It is from those communities that you have listed that we look at the numbers of Jews in the United States, and we're seeing, Be'ezus Hashem, a stability to those numbers, despite the fact that there are so many who are dropping out of Judaism, because the birth rates and family size that are there in the Frum community, and especially in the locales that you have listed there, are so big. And so what they're doing, you want to look at people who say, oh, why don't they get a job? First of all, most of those people do have jobs. Most of those do have jobs. When you look at those communities, the numbers, it's not like these are all kollel communities. Mm-hmm. They do have jobs. And I'll tell you something else. No one who has that family size can be qualified as a freeloader. They're working very hard in all kinds of ways in order to be able to raise families like that. They've made choices. We can question those choices. We can decide to make other choices, but they are adding a valuable asset to the Jewish people, and they're also adding, we would say, with utter confidence, because the Jewish people, we are here, v'nivruchu v'cha kol mishpachos ha'adama, as we hope and must be a blessing to the society that surrounds us. They're adding value to their community. So to portray this as a bunch of people sitting around choosing to be on welfare and spending the day drinking beer and whatever else it is, that's not the picture that you're seeing there. That's one point which I think is very important for us to have in perspective. Let's go the other way for a moment and speak about the trap of these kinds of situations, which is in general a major issue when we're dealing with any financial issue. The term nakia, which was used earlier, that is, the government benefits are a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we have to make sure that we maintain perfect ethics in our entitlements to those benefits. And it can be tricky. It could be hard to give up government-funded health insurance. And therefore, we have to make sure that we don't put ourselves...
Was that a plug for Obamacare? Or was not? Okay.
It was not a plug for Obamacare, in our dramatically Republican community, we have a lot of people who are benefiting from Obamacare. Mm-hmm. A lot. And I don't know how many of them returned the Biden stimulus checks either.
Not many.
But we just have to make sure that we approach these things, all of our community approaches these things with the integrity of truly being deserving and honestly and truthfully deserving the benefits, and that's a very, very important value. The Rambam wrote in Hilchos Talmud Torah, famously, that, and the Rambam was very strong about this, and most Rishonim disagreed with him on the extent to which he took it. But the Rambam wrote very vigorously about the idea that a person shouldn't be supporting their lifestyle by becoming dependent upon others, on the support of others. That a person should study Torah, and they should study Torah, and they should be dedicated to Torah, and they want the crown of Torah, they should do it, in a sense, day and night. But the Rambam insisted that that's not to rule out the time spent to work, to live. Simple lifestyle, so it wouldn't be an overwhelming job, but that they shouldn't put the onus on others to be able to support their lifestyle. And that's, of course, a very tricky issue. Sure. in Frum economics and in this matter as well. The counterpoint to consider, mm-hmm. and I would just say for myself, in personal lifestyle choices and direction, I don't personally like to do the government program thing. Of course, we all benefit from some government
Sure.
programs, but to be able to work towards self-sufficiency, saves us as individuals, as a community, from certain nisyonos. There's some character building that's valuable in Yigia Kapecha Kisochel. But remember, there aren't objections which are raised to the level of government support in graduate school communities, where everybody is getting government support in order to be able to make it through their graduate school and PhD. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be simplistic. And people say, yeah, of course, yeah, because they're doing that now, and in 6 years or in 8 years, they'll be killing it, whatever the expression is. They'll be making lots of money, and they'll be fine. It's true, but the idea is that there's an interest to support the advancement of certain values, certain people. We want people who will have this advanced level of education. Let's help them. Now, the government didn't decide that they want to support from lifestyles or otherwise, but again, a community is an asset. They're going to have higher rates of children. It's going to be much easier to classify, to have higher poverty rates. They need more money just to make it. And I think the most important point I would want to make is, I don't want to be sitting here in judgment of the choices of other communities without trying to hear their voices or make their voices be heard.
Understood.
You look at statistics like that, you could say, that's horrible. How could they do such a thing? It may not be my personal lifestyle choice. I could see lots of reasons that some of those things are some of the best investments that that society could make.
And those
investing in children.
Yeah, and turning over to revenue streams, when you look at families and not necessarily Jewish, there's this need for two income streams, right? You have the man who's going to work, and more recently the women in the workplace. How does a shtadlis fit into that?
Same. What does that mean? That is a significant. It's a significant ishtadlis. It's not new that women are working. It's in the Mishnah that women provided a portion of the income in a family. But yes, the level of going out of the house and things like that is certainly part of something that has changed generationally, and some see it as opportunity, and some see as well, and some of those very same people who see it as opportunity see that there are costs involved in terms of hands-on parenting, involvement of parents in the lives of their children. So it's a cost. And
what's ideal though, right? You have the women, more and more women are becoming the breadwinners, while perhaps the husband is learning more, or more responsibility on the finance side is being handed towards the women. Is that ideal? There's those that say it upsets family dynamics in some ways.
I think it does. I don't think that anyone would be able to say that there's. I shouldn't say. It's not for me to say what anybody else would say.
I usually use "there are those that say" as my couch when it's my own personal opinion, but you do you. No.
There aren't decisions in life that we make or choices we make that are 100% anything. We live in a world where every good choice comes with a cost. And let's speak, first of all, stage one. Stage one is that women engaged in the workforce, I'm not talking about for fulfillment purposes, which is an issue for itself, and a significant one for itself, but for financial reasons. is not something which is by any means a main breadwinner kollel choice matter. In every community, of every lifestyle choice, two incomes has become more of a norm. So that's one piece, and there is a cost of the level of present and engaged and dedicated parenting, undistracted, that is going to be assumed to be paid for that. Mm-hmm. Many women and men, because again, when a woman is working, we can't say, "Oh, you're working plus," right? The husband has to share even more in the parenting role in such a situation. So many who are in such situations they're keenly aware of their children's needs, and they work very hard to be able to do the necessary corrective. And Baruch Hashem, they do great, but they're aware. There could be places, and there could come a time when people don't even know that there's such a thing as a valuable standard of seeing your children off to school, being home when they get back from school, being available for them in the evening. Quality time is very nice, but you can't, as a wise person who I married to once said to me, you can't schedule the time for your child to feel comfortable to just unburden themselves about, you have something which is really on your mind from school, perfect, between 5:30 and 6, right. I won't take any emails.
Send me a calendar invite, doesn't work here.
Right, you have to just be available, and it's an issue, it's a societal issue, generally, it's a societal issue for us that has to be compensated for. The other issue that you raise about women choosing to be principal breadwinners because husbands will be dedicated to Limud HaTorah or things like that, that's also an issue. And it's a choice of values. There's a cost. Of course there's a cost. Mm-hmm. There's a cost to the maternal ability to be able to play that role. There's a cost to family dynamics, to what it means to be a husband and a father. But there's a benefit, and they're choosing the benefit over the cost. And there would be a rationale for that. Again, everyone can make their hashara, their estimation, and their decision. But I have, my wife and I spent the first 7 years of our marriage, I was in kollel. It wasn't like some kind of a crazy thing. The cost of living was much less. Mm-hmm. Our apartment rent was $310.
I hope you locked in at that price.
What's that?
I hope you locked in at that price. It was. I think if you would ask her, you would ask, the opportunity we had to start our marriage, where I was, learning from first thing in the morning till late at night, and then involved. Also I contributed to the household income. At that time as well, but it has had an impact that we feel in our marriage to this day. So there are costs and there are benefits. Let's talk Meiser. Moving to another topic here. Someone who's accepting some level of tzedakah or government benefits or whatnot, how does Meiser play a role in that? And then another question on that, when it comes to tuition, right? There are those that say you could allocate some sort of Meiser towards tuition. Others say it's not so simple. What's the final judgment for the listening audience here, or how should one go about it?
Okay, so there's a big question in Paiskim whether it's a chiyuv, whether it's a minhag. I think the broad consensus is that It's something which is a very, very valuable hanhaga, a very valuable practice. I personally have certainly have tried to have maintained it, Baruch Hashem, and it's a very, very, very valuable hanhaga. Again, that some say is an obligation, but others would say is a hanhaga tova, and one that we have the rare occurrence of a promise, which is found in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, not a skula, which is in an advertisement someplace, but a promise and a promise from the Navi, Malachi, that Hashem promises bracha to one who does this. That said, it's a person who's not making ends meet, and especially when they're giving of tzedakah, will impose a greater burden on those who are helping to make up the difference, needs to have their permission in order to engage in Meiser. I can't say he's not mechuyev, and it seems clear from many paiskim. Again, everyone should ask their own shilas. I assume that they don't turn to this podcast for their absolute halachic guidance, or do they?
I hope not, because I'm by no means qualified to even direct them to the right sources. But
so again, since there are so many paiskim who would say that a person who's not making ends meet is not mechuyev in Meiser, for a person to take it upon themselves to do it and believe in the skula value is not necessarily appropriate, and maybe downright wrong if, as a result, someone else is making up the shortfall. Whether a patron, whether a lender that they're not sure how they're going to pay back, or things like that. So that's the only qualification which we would give. Other than that, people have to be responsible in many aspects of their savings, of their finances. But one of them would be to put money into savings and to save for that non-surprise, which is that Be'ezus Hashem, 13 years after your son is born, he's going to need a bar mitzvah. Mm-hmm. And Be'ezus Hashem, we hope and pray that sometime afterwards your children will need weddings. So you have to plan for those, and you have to plan for retirement and put money away for those things. But you also have to put away money in the eternal account of Meiser. Mm-hmm. And of tzedakah and Meiser. So that's the case. Now, can Meiser money be used to pay tuition? So there are those who say yes. It's very well known that Ramosha Feinstein felt that it was not appropriate to do so generally, that it would be called poreach chovo min ha-Meiser. We have an obligation to pay tuition, to pay schar limud, to educate our children, and Rav Moshe held even boys and girls, mm-hmm. and therefore you're not allowed to pay obligations from Meiser.
And the full amount?
Okay, so could there be some aspect of the schar limud that you would be able to as Meiser? So there are people who would find different things. So for example, if there's a building fund in the school.
There's always a building fund, by the way. There's never not.
Okay, the amount that's for the building fund, the amount that's a required donation. So some say, oh, it's still an obligation. But part of it is that the school is saying, we know that our parents have charitable dollars, and we are requiring that they direct some of those charitable dollars to us. That doesn't mean that you can't use Meiser for that.
Right.
There are some who would say that if the price of tuition is higher than the cost of educating the child, some schools have that. In other words, in order to have built-in scholarship rates, that maybe that extra, that overage may also be considered to be something. But again, these are shilas which people should ask for individual hadracha. There's just another tack that I would just mention, which is that some people might say that, technically speaking, I could qualify for a scholarship. Even according to this particular institution's guidelines, I could qualify for a scholarship. Mm-hmm. But rather than apply for a scholarship, I'm going to pay full, with a portion of it coming from my charitable funds. Mm-hmm. And if they're accurate about it, I don't know if they know the formula, right. But if, for example, if tuition is $10,000, and based on their income, they would be entitled to a scholarship that they'd only have to pay $6,000. But they say, you know what? I make $180,000 a year or whatever it is, and I have therefore, $18,000 of charitable money. I'm going to give $4,000. I would qualify, let's say again, because I have 14 children for a scholarship. I'm going to give the difference out of my charitable money, and that's a beautiful thing to do, because isn't it appropriate to give charity, discretionary charity, to a place which is doing so much for your own children?
Is tuition too high?
Is tuition too high?
I could elaborate, but I figured, I think people like, I asked people around. I said, "Hey, I'm having a discussion with Rabbi Hauer," and a few people said, "You got to discuss tuition. It's very
You got to
high."
discuss tuition. You can't have a discussion about Jewish economics or Orthodox economics without somewhere touching on the topic of tuition.
It's likely the largest expense that most frum Jews have,
Yeah.
assuming that they
For sure.
have children.
Yeah. Families that are raising children. Yeah, it's more than their health insurance.
Right.
It's almost every case more than their mortgage.
Right. Is the percentage of one's income in 2021 allocated towards tuition higher than what that percentage was 20, 30 years ago? Meaning, have the numbers been steady, and this is just another generation dealing with the same question?
I don't like answering data questions without being able to give you the exact numbers and so on and so forth.
The OU has a data team, right?
We have a data team,
Okay.
and I just don't have all the answers to all the questions on my fingertips. I don't even remember the name of some divisions. Remember? I don't know whether the number's 20 or 30 years ago, or whether it's, but it certainly has grown, I think, in terms of the proportion to income, the tuition responsibility or burden, whatever it is that you want to call it. And it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. Is it too high? What do you mean by that question? Are schools charging more than they need to charge? Are we funding the Bahamas junkets for the staff that they do, for professional days? No. Nobody's getting, I shouldn't say, somebody will tell me a story of someone somewhere who has a privately owned school and they're doing fine and so on and so forth. I understand, but by and large, chinuch is not where people go to make the big bucks. If there's one important lesson that came from this podcast, it was that, right? Right. So people don't. It's not lucrative. Everyone is struggling. Teachers are struggling. Rebbeim are struggling. Schools are struggling. So is it too high? It's expensive. It's expensive. On our end, on the OU end, we continue to invest very significantly in our advocacy, our teacher advocacy, to help get more of a governmental partnership in it. And it brings a lot of resources into schools, but there's so much that is needed. So tuition costs remain high and difficult. All of us should be thinking about how we could perhaps, quote unquote, live within our means and see if there are things that we could do to make it more affordable. But I don't sit in the seat to be able to, for sure not to want to, and certainly not to be able to point a finger and say, they're doing this, and so on, extravagantly. There are things which schools might do that are beyond the basics, and it could, many times there's a cheshbon, a calculation, just like individuals make in their own lives,
Right.
that this is necessary for the environment that the kids need, or that in order to have the kind of support of the parent body, this is what we have to deliver. But we need to figure out how to make it less punishing.
Right.
And I know that sounds sort of like helpless and saying, yeah, it's a problem, I have no clue what to do about it. But we're trying to do, we have to continue to try to do, and you should keep bringing up the question, because we have to continue to to find ways to just ease it a little bit.
There's this question as to why one who follows the Torah way, and that there's this commandment not to charge someone interest, right? And they ask what's the reasoning behind that in the term, why can't you charge interest? And there's this pshat I heard that when someone works for their money, they're thankful to Hashem. But ribis, when someone knows that this interest, this money is going to come to them, they forget. They're not thankful anymore. And staying away from an industry in which it's just magiali, it's that check's going to come every on the first of every month. That's something we have to stay away from. So my question is, how do we infuse thankfulness into our everyday life, right? How do we work on being appreciative for everything we do have, right? We can always look at our budgets and our numbers and say, hey, it's not enough, but how do we focus on the positive here, right? Like the way I phrased that question earlier about onus, and you had mentioned, no, it's an opportunity. How do we take a step back and say, hey, I'm thankful for what I do have? How do we make that the norm versus, hey, I'm struggling, oh, I gotta go to work. No, I'm going to work. This is an opportunity. I should be excited to have such an opportunity. I should be excited that I have a job. Yes, it's not necessarily the job I've always wanted to have, right? There has to be some sort of...
She'elas chacham chatzi tshuva, a wise question is half the answer. In this case, it's the whole answer. Gratitude has to be an intentional exercise that people bring themselves to focus on. There are delicious anecdotes, stories that bring it out. I'm sure you may have read the story. I've read the same story about different people who a person came to the Kosel one night, late at night, a rabbi and a gvir, and a wealthy person. And they come to the Kosel, to Daven Maariv late at night, and they see a man, looks like a Yerushalmi, and he's standing by the Kosel, and he's crying his eyes out. And they daven Maariv, and he's still standing there crying his eyes out. And one signals to the other, and the fellow goes over to him and says, waits for him to sort of like take a pause, take a breath, and he says, "Excuse me, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom." He says, I do a lot of things to help people in different situations, and I couldn't help but notice you seem to be. Is there something that I could help you with? Everything is fine, and he doesn't quite take no for an answer. He says, I help people who are dealing with illness, and I have a very good friend who helps people with parnas, and I happen to have with me a person who's a very wealthy person who likes to help people. And the person, no. And he kept asking, and he kept saying, no. And finally he said, excuse me, but you have to ask me. You have to tell me, I just saw you were crying your eyes out. And the man said, yeah, I was. He says, tonight, I made the last Sheva brachas for my youngest child. And I came to the Kaisel to say thank you. To thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for everything which I had. How many times have you gotten a request from someone, my aunt is going into surgery, could you please daven for her? How many times did you get 3 days later, my aunt did terrific in surgery, could you please thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for me? We ask. We don't say thanks. I don't know if it's true or apocryphal, but I saw written in a sefer a story of a person who was davening with the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim's Shemona Esrei just went on and on and on. And the person standing asked the Chafetz Chaim, he says, Mipnei ma ata marich, he said, it's Moedim. In the bracha of Moedim, of thanks, he started, how do I count the ways? Ilufinu malei shira kayam. And there are people who express gratitude in their lives. There are people who, I know people who have their habit that before they go to sleep at night, they have to find 30 things that they're grateful for. Maybe they say it to themselves, maybe they say it to their spouse, maybe they say it to their children. Friday night at the table after Maitzi, someone can, people can do it. But just like in life, just always just to pause and to express gratitude. That was what David HaMelech put in place when he said that you should make 100 brachas every day. Just keep stopping and realizing and recognizing the blessings that we have. There's nothing healthier in the world. There's nothing healthier in the world. We're called Yehudim. Yehudim means we're professionally grateful.
The Thank You Hashem movement would be a beautiful
Thank you,
sponsor
Hashem.
for this episode.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Let's think.
Yeah,
Come on.
right.
It's amazing. It's an amazing thing, and we're so blessed. We're so blessed. Of course, we have needs and so on and so forth. This is like a time of such shefa of bracha in the Jewish people, and we're just going to focus on that. We need more and expand the needs, or just pause and say, "Wow, it's unbelievable."
Beautiful, beautiful thought. I think we've covered a lot of ground here over the last hour and plus, and I don't see this as the end of the conversation, but the beginning of a great one. Expect to be back if I'm invited. Here in the
Could I give you a parting thought?
Yes, please.
You can conclude it or not. We started this discussion speaking about bitachon and hishtadlus, about efforts versus faith. The presence of Hashem in our lives is not just based on how much work we put in, but just what the focus is of our lives. And in this quote-unquote struggle between hishtadlus and bitachon, of efforts and trust in Hashem, it goes side by side with that other struggle between materialism and spirituality. And the place where the Rambam, for example, says the opposite. It says, the person who dedicates their lives to spirituality, Hashem will take care of them. Will take care of them. Is not because they're just not working. It's because in their lives, the biggest reality were the intangibles, were the spiritual things. And when those become the most valuable things in our lives, we're rolling out the red carpet for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come into our lives and to do that much more for us. So it not only lowers our monthly nut, it makes us able to work less, but it just changes the entire culture of our lives and will bring with it much bracha. So,
love that.
Kaddish to you. It's good, just good all around.
Yeah. I have a flight out to Kansas at 11 p.m. tonight, so we'll end it here. But thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And there you have it, all your questions answered. Just kidding. You probably have even more questions than you did from when you first started listening to this episode. But that's the goal. The goal of Kosher Money is to create dialogue, spread awareness, try to remove the stigma around conversations like that. The same way mental health, right? Mental health has come a long way from where it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And funny I mentioned that, like I didn't know, one of the upcoming episodes we're going to discuss mental health as it relates to money. We're going to focus on the biggest expense Orthodox Jewish families are facing. Spoiler alert, it's tuition. Does it really have to be that high? We're going to go into that. Another episode we're going to do is budgeting. Really excited about that episode. It's not just one episode, but we're going to hit it home. In this upcoming episode, you'll hear all about money management. Stay tuned. Yes, right, because we can't do that without them. Our sponsor is livingsmarterjewish.org, a fantastic money-based resource. Head over there, click around. If you have questions for them related to your money, email info@livingsmarterjewish.org. This episode, as all our episodes are, is brought to you by livinglechaim.com. Search them on YouTube. Subscribe for awesome content. Follow them on Instagram. Be sure, okay, and this is important, be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, There's so many different podcast networks. Everyone uses a different one. But if you have the ability to review us, 5 stars. If it goes up to 40 stars, give us 40 stars. We love stars, and we want to help you. So, until then, keep your money kosher.
You can find out more about kosher money by visiting livinglechaim.com, and you can see the other podcasts that we're going to have there. This podcast has been hosted by my brother, Eli Langer, produced by me, Yaakov Langer, and brought to you by Living L'Chaim, in partnership with Living Smarter Jewish, an awesome organization under the awesome umbrella of the OU. Until next time, enjoy life. Living L'Chaim.